Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. My name is Rita Chincotta, and I'm so pleased to be joined this week by Dr. Kirsten Peterson. Kirsten, thank you very much for joining me this week.
I like that deliberate correction on your pronunciation. That was so a pleasure to be here, Rita. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, it is so good to talk to you. Kirsten and I have been colleagues, I guess, for quite some time as part of different networking business circles. But I was saying to Kirsten just before we came on that I remember something very deeply, more than a year ago now, a conversation that we were having with a group of others just around your thought leadership. And I thought, this woman is onto something. And so I couldn't not have you on the podcast, because I think that what you've got to share is really important, particularly for those that are pursuing that path of deliberate leadership. But it would be remiss of me to not introduce you properly. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Kirsten is a performance psychologist, leadership coach, speaker, and most recently an author, having just published her first book, When Grit Is Not Enough. And I can't wait to hear more about the book, Kirsten. She spent decades working in elite sport, both with the US Olympic Committee as a senior sports psychologist, and then as head of the performance psychology team at the Australian Institute of Sport. We're very lucky to have you on today. Kirsten melds this performance under pressure experience with expertise in neuroscience and mindfulness to help leaders and teams in and out of sport to work better with their brains and minds for improved performance, well-being, and interpersonal connection. Thank you, Kirsten. I know it's always odd to hear your bio read out to you, but it's for the benefit of everybody else.
So many words. Yeah, it's funny to listen to, but thank you.
Pleasure. We are so lucky to have you here, given your experience, particularly in this world of sport and business, and what you bring from that elite athlete perspective. Fair to say that it's probably an old reference now. So many of us have watched Ted Lasso and other similar, sporting shows, whether we're sports people or not. I always feel a little hypocritical with a sporting reference, because I like individual training, but I don't play team sport. But I reckon through your time and your career, you will have seen so many parallels between sport and the business world and the work you now do with leaders. Is that the case, or is that just an assumption on my part?
Well, it is and it isn't, to the extent, and I've made this mistake in consulting outside of the sport world. We'll start with the ways in which it is similar. I think, head coach is kind of a CEO of a team, and we're learning about what that means, and that hiring a talented athlete to go into a coach role is not necessarily the smartest move, because when somebody's really good at something and then they have to turn around and teach it, they can get frustrated when athletes aren't picking it up really fast. So we want good teachers and mentors in that coach role. So I certainly know in my work in the business sector, sometimes we're good at one role, but then we move into the leadership role and it's a whole nother skill set. And just because we're good at the thing that our business doesn't mean we're going to be a great leader. So there's that piece. There is the idea of a closely held goal. I worked with Olympic sport in particular. And so approaching the Olympics, how do we manage to perform when the stakes are so high? And being able to face failure with, a sense of ease rather than hatred, because it's coming for us all, which leads me to, and not that we're inevitably going to fail, but if we're trying to get good at anything, I believe we're often experimenting and trying, and we want to get really, I believe you wouldn't disagree with the word agile in terms of fail fast and move forward. But the difference between sport and other domains that I didn't really process till somebody kind of slapped me in the face with it was around the idea that it's often a zero-sum game in sport. That you go to the Olympics, there's a lot of people competing in a particular sport, there's one gold medal. So failure in that regard is a lot more prevalent. But when I brought that, for example, that mindset or that approach into working with doctors, one emergency room physician dryly commented that we want to save every patient. Thank you very much. It's not just one patient who gets saved. And so it's understanding the nuances of what we're trying to accomplish in a given domain. So, lawyers want to win every case, doctors want to save every patient. So where in sport, it might be helping athletes and coaches understand and value the process as much as the product, because you're spending so much time in the process and the product is so elusive. There's other nuances we have to give to other domains in that space. Very long answer to your very short question.
No, I love it, because I've written here and I've circled it the word success, because for each individual, each leader, that measure of success is going to be very different. So as you say, for the Olympic athlete, it's gold, but in that operating room, we're not just going to save 90% of lives. We're going to try and save every single one.
Exactly.
And so it is defining that measure of success. The other thing that I was thinking as you were sharing that story with us, Kirsten, is I guess we're on display. So whether from a corporate athlete perspective, and even on the sporting field, our ability to be able to reach our measures of success, or at least try, everyone's seeing us do it while we're doing it. It's very vulnerable. I guess with a corporate athlete, we're not necessarily seeing the thinking behind it. We're not seeing always the strategizing. We don't have the insight into the war room, if I can use that term, and a team kind of getting ready for whatever, it is in front of them. It's not as visual. I guess it's visual to your team. But have you got any comments around that, around, our vulnerability that comes through, when people are seeing us performing, and then ultimately we get the gold medal, or we don't?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, it was my career in sports psychology. It was an exquisite honor to be working with these people. And I would say that the vulnerability in elite sport is even greater because it's on TV. Millions of people are watching. I don't even care if you're working for Apple or Microsoft. That is not the case. And often in business, a given success is behind the scenes, but it comes out in the quarterly report late, like it's a bit delayed. And so, but nevertheless, those nuances being said, there is something really important, I think, in the ability of leaders, just as with elite athletes and coaches, to lean into that vulnerability, that to be seen in that way doesn't kill us, and I say that because I feel like some people are deeply afraid of appearing less than perfect, and unless it's I'm going to be political here, Barnaby Joyce falling down on the streets of Canberra kind of moment, there are many moments in which we may not get what we want, and yet we still have to. It is in the beauty in standing up the next day, that is, and just to be able to kind of embrace it and be with it as part of the journey, rather than seeing it as such a rigid definition of me today, and I'm crumbling because I didn't get what I wanted. So there's a flexibility, but there's an openness and a joy in the process that I think the very best athletes find. And I find when leaders can also be in that space of kind of that flexibility and leaning into being human, we have a lot more sustainability in the high performance space.
And then further to that, I guess it's almost a responsibility that some may feel to their teams and to their organizations around role modeling. Not that you would intentionally seek to fail, whatever that failure is for you in your language and in your context, but it's then, okay, so whatever it was that I was working on didn't go to plan. How can I now use this to let my team know that it's all right? We're going to stuff it up from time to time, not intentionally, not maliciously, but it happens to all of us, and that it's okay because we pick ourselves up. And the inside, what are we learning from it?
Yes, there's something profound there, and I'm sure you are aware of how Google looked at good to great teams in this concept of psychological safety. What you're describing there as a key characteristic of it is the leader who is willing to ask for help. Gee, I'm not sure what to do here. What do you guys think? Or that didn't go quite to plan. What do people think about what happened here? Which is different from, oh, I've had a terrible day. I'm in the middle of a divorce. Save me from myself. It's not what we're talking about here. But this to nuance and in leading with that openness of experience, we actually give permission for others to be the same. And when we can unlock and make it safe, that's the safety part of psychological safety. Great things can happen. Now, people are afraid of this, I find, in the worlds you and I travel in the sense like safety sounds like comfort, sounds like where's the accountability? And now anybody who's in the space understands it's equal, the safety and support and exquisite and important non-toxic accountability. So we're here doing great things together. We're going to each all help each other be our very best, and that's the accountability we're talking about here, while make it safe enough to talk about the things that have gone wrong when we're not quite 100% and when we need support.
Yeah, it's around that risk, isn't it? It's a risk of stuffing it up, the risk of voicing an opinion that may be contrary to popular view. It's that risk really that we're talking about. So from a safety perspective, it's not to, yeah, if we get that sense of safety net, kind of, but not really, not cushiony safety net. It's just to know that you can.
I'm going to nuance what you just said, because it's not just the risk, because the risk exists, but it is our fear of the risk. I'm afraid that something bad will happen if I do X. And where, if we are going to go to and I find I don't get a lot of traction sometimes with leaders because they don't even realize that it's fear that is driving them sometimes, but it's our fear of something bad happening that leads me to knee jerk into a decision. But when we can be aware of the fear, like I'm afraid to take that risk, then we're in magic territory in my book, because now we're getting to something that's important.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because that fear is with a lot of leaders that I work with, and no doubt that you also, work with, they're not happy to, they're very, very uncomfortable to declare that this is something, and they actually probably even haven't registered that it's something they're worried or like fearful.
Yeah, totally. Because it's so not in the, I don't think it's in the ethos of leadership to, we don't have any books called The Fearful Leader. And
there you go. So. There's one.
That's true. But it's not, because fear, and I could say freely as a psychologist, I find this in the camp of mental health, that there are the things we don't talk about, we kind of don't want to know that exists, and then we pathologize. And in like being afraid of fear, may I say, fear owns us, because whether consciously or unconsciously, then we start to act in ways we're not even conscious of. And there is a gorgeousness, and I use that, I know it's a woo-woo term maybe, but when we can be open and acknowledging and understanding how fear shows up and how it triggers us, there is deliberate leadership. You know what I mean? Like then we're getting down to it, and we're able to talk about it. Now, maybe we don't talk every fear with our team members, but I hope we have some council of, advisors that we can actually be that open with.
Yeah, I love that. That'll be one to pull out as the quote, because I reckon that is where you're hitting the nail there on the head around. That is deliberate leadership comes out when you're prepared to go there and to declare, not only am I managing a risk around this is, well, number one, identifying it as a fear, and then working through it. And, as you would any other fear, if you can, of course. I love that. Kirsten, you're when we were having that chat back late 22, you and I were doing the same program together, and at that point, just remind me of the timing. I don't think your book was finished, but it was pretty close to it.
It was funny. It came out the middle day. It got published like November 15th, 2022 was publication date. And I remember sitting next to a colleague and going, "Oh my gosh, my book just got published." Just having a good laugh in the front row of that program. Yes. So
yeah, well, and I remember hearing the title going, that is such a great title, a little bit like the one that you've just declared, The Fearful Leader. Watch out, people, it's coming, The Fearful Leader. It's the next one. But when you wrote When Grit Is Not Enough, can you give us a little bit of background to what you wanted to achieve through putting the book out, and based on your experience of working with different leaders, what were you seeing at the time, and how did you want to support them through the book?
It was a COVID book, as many of our books are, because we had time to write it because nothing else was happening. And it was also an observation. In having my business fall apart, I had a lot of time to kind of check in with people. And what I noticed were that there was a subset of people, and this was back when I was more involved in elite sport, subset of people in the elite sport sector who I would have assumed would just motor on and get on with things, who actually kind of fell apart. And it was sort of the violent disruption of what, and you come to realize how sport runs is very prepared. You know the schedule a year out, you know what you have to do, and it's in the doing of that that excellence comes. But when there is no schedule, it really upended the people who are used to like being gritty because they know what the path is. And the epitome of this was one national team coach here in Australia who, when the Tokyo Games were supposed to happen in 2022 and 2020, and then happened in 2021, so it was back then. The games went from happening like 2 months from now to 14 months from now. And this particular coach, when they all got announced, continued to train his squad in the exact same way, which is the pointy end of like grind, because you're getting ready. You're polishing the diamond at that point. When we're all of a sudden, we're back to being coal at this point because we have another year and we can't, the team that was selected isn't going to be the team that's going. You follow? Because it's pointless. So he shed a quarter of his national team because he wasn't able to see through the difference in the circumstances around him. Grit did not serve. Mm-hmm. Whereas another coach I was talking to, we were just chatting, and he was talking to me about all the sports psychology support he gets. I said, oh, wow. So what aspects of performance are you working on now? And he just put his hand up to the Zoom screen. He's like, we are not on to performance right now. It is all about mental health. Mm-hmm. My girls, everything's been upended. We're having town halls with parents. This was a collegiate coach, so there's slightly different environment, all to meet the needs that were right in front of us. So you could say it's this ability to be agile on one hand, but it's combined with the ability to kind of see the world as it is. And of course, the world as it was then was kind of horrible. It was so unpredictable. We didn't know if people were going to have jobs, if economies were going to fall apart. We didn't have a vaccine yet. And so the difference for people who could stop, and even though the future was really foggy, look down at their feet and say, okay, what is it that is needed right now? Could be the opposite of grit, right? So sometimes it's just not enough. All that being said, that's kind of the genesis of the book. Now I forgot your other part of the question.
Oh, just in terms of the leaders that you've worked with, what was the support? How are you trying to support them through the messages in the book?
It was this idea of accepting reality for what it actually is, this embracing. And there was a quote that a meditation teacher I really valued had come out with, and the quote was, right now it's like this. And while that sounds kind of trite and obvious, but on the other hand, it is the difference between somebody looking at something and going, what do we need right now to support ourselves, rather than, hypervigilance, which is what we do. And we're just so afraid, and we're kind of pushing out, we're scanning the horizon for some vision without really paying attention to what's happening inside me. So I talk a lot around developing this. I'm also a meditation teacher, so I find a lot of the practices in a sort of a contemplative practice can really serve to soothe us. And this word equanimity, I don't know if this word means something to you, but I find 90% of people are like, what? And it's kind of this, it's in layman's terms, secular terms, it's an easygoingness to what's happening right now. So if you think about the nervous system, when we're under threat, it's sympathetic all the way, fight or flight. This idea of acceptance allows us a little bit more leeway to get into the parasympathetic or rest and digest. It doesn't change the nature of what is happening, but when we can be, okay, what's going on right now, and checking in often and regularly in a way that just says, right, how it is right now is okay. On one level, you could say it's terrible, it's a shit show, but actually, even the shit show is okay in the moment. You know what I mean? So it's even develop that sort of space between stimulus and response to give people that chance. And then I like to say that leadership is contagious. So how we are in that space of ultimate uncertainty, we can convey that sense of it's okay, we're okay, and let's sit down together and see what we need to do today, or whatever the problem is that we have, but coming in with that sense of okayness.
Yeah. As you say that, it brings to mind stability and groundedness, even when the shit show is happening around us.
Yeah.
You know, so we know, like, in terms of leadership characteristics, a lot of people will say that's a characteristic that they value, their leader, even in times of real challenge and significant hardship, that the leader can provide this steadiness. Yeah. Which is not to be inauthentic and nothing to see here. It's all good. It's certainly not that, but it's the challenge and the turmoil is happening around us, but it's going to be okay. Like we've got, as you say, this easygoingness.
And it's interesting because I'm even saying that I may have said like, oh, it's okay right now. Mm. The really hard thing to accept is it might not be okay.
Yeah, going forward.
You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like we're okay. Like, and so from a self-compassion individual perspective, I'll often counsel people to don't do it in public if you don't want, but put your hand on your heart. This is hard and I'm okay. Yeah. Is what works for me. But like just even be able to take that pause. But because everybody has a different kind of stress signature, and I've certainly met my share of leaders, and I'm wondering if this is true in your world, that when it's uncertain, my mind speeds up and I think I have to make quick decisions to appear leadery. Mm. You know, I have to appear decisive. Mm. And so how many times do we knee jerk into a decision and we haven't taken people along for the ride, and it might not have been the decision that, you know, there will be times when you have to knee jerk into a decision. Don't get me wrong, but if that's our default when we are feeling stressed or the situation is really stressful, this kind of practice can be the most important, you know, because when I'm mindless, I go right to that thing. And I'm working with a leader right now who's in that space.
Yeah, I love that. So for those of you watching or listening rather than watching, head on over to the YouTube clip and you'll see, okay, so what is it? We're putting our hand on our heart and we're saying, this is hard and I'm okay.
Yeah. And I think thank you for letting me sort of unpack this a little. So this is a form of self-compassion when we realize we are struggling in any way, shape, or form. So this is not going to solve the problem, but what we're trying to do is invite a sense of compassion for our own suffering in this moment. And it is this idea of pausing and just like, man, this is hard. Just this simple acknowledgement of what is. And people will resist it because somehow they think it's the road to like Ben and Jerry's and Netflix surfing, but actually we're just taking a couple of seconds to be on our own side. Yeah. Now this comes out of the really deep and good work of a social psychologist in the US. Her name is Dr. Kirsten Neff. She's got an empire around the whole idea of self-compassion. I could go on forever, but I will say, I just think in the time, and it's such a great little tool that we can offer to ourselves. And even as leaders, when we're going through a tough time with our team, you know, yeah, it's really hard right now. Whew. Yeah. How are you guys doing? You know, like that, it's okay. Like to your point, like nothing to see here. Well, actually there is something to see here and we should like acknowledge that it's hard. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. And I'm glad it's because you reinforced just then that it's going to be okay, like a hope and a prayer, right? It's we're okay this moment. We're okay. Yeah. And then, you know, it's that acknowledgement, and then you can proceed forward, whatever it brings, whatever that situation brings.
Or we're together, or I've got my own back. There's a million, you know, different ways to approach it depending on how it feels authentic to you, but it is this moment that we want to acknowledge. Yeah. Thank you.
Kirsten, the book title, you know, as I've shared with you, I absolutely love it because often, and if I think back to my own very early jobs, even childhood, you know, eldest kid of migrant parents, it was absolutely grit. It was no complaining, no lounging about. Rest is bad. Like we rest when we go to sleep, you know, and I'm thankful. I say all that without disparaging any of my upbringing because I wouldn't be here, right? So I'm very grateful. But as an adult now and as a parent, you kind of get to see, yeah, that probably wasn't always so great in terms of her teaching, like to push through. And my trainer, personal trainer, will often say, like, she'll say, feel the burn, feel the grind. And when she says it, I've got to say this to, like, it's not always helpful, because you're like, I don't want to be reminded that this hurts right now. Like, it's that we've got to push through. And that's when I think about grit. It's what comes to mind for me is literally gritting the teeth, which my dentist tells me off about all the time because it causes all sorts of issues, and kind of pushing through. So when in your research, and obviously with your background, can you talk to us a little bit more about grit and why it's important to acknowledge that it's not enough?
And for anyone who is not familiar or just think grit, you look up on the dictionary as a word, I highly recommend you read Angela Duckworth's seminal book in this, which is Grit, which I think has gotten misrepresented massively. And so it's a good read. And her whole life's work is teaching. Sorry about this. There's a helicopter in the background. She teaches kids how to be more gritty, because we've got a bit of our society is this, everyone wins everything, and you don't really, you get a trophy for everything, and actually kids don't know how to actually do sustained effort, which I think is important. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But when it comes to this idea of grit and over gritting, it really resonated with me that grit on the outside appears like the veins in the neck sticking out, and it's this effort like your trainer was speaking to. But if you talk to truly elite athletes, and I wrote about this in my book, the whole third part of my book was about effort. And I talk about clean versus dirty effort. And this idea of clean effort, it's the difference. And I used a spin class analogy for it, that you're going in and you're just paying attention in that same sense of equanimity to the efforts that are coming, and you're just noticing them. Like, my breath is increasing, I'm working. And because I found my own language in hard efforts was getting hijacked, like, oh my God, I'm gonna break, and so I was like in fear. And I feel like to your point about your trainer, like when we make pain, like we celebrate it, not smartly, we can push ourselves into overtraining or injury. But what you want is the least effort possible to get you where you want to go. And the clean mind around it, so that it's merely noticing so physically, it's easy to see it. Like, if anybody's been in a gym class and you're being pushed on a spin bike or whatever class, just to notice the sensations, but notice the dialogue or the stories you're telling that might be making it dirty effort. Like, I hate this. The workout doesn't hate you, by the way. The spin bike has nothing against you. So hate is kind of like not even a good idea to walk in with anything, or any kind of task. As soon as we make the effort harder by the story we tell, we make it harder for us to get through. So again, I just love that. So if it's not about not working hard, but it's doing it with the easiest way that you can bring to it, and while paying attention and becoming cognizant. And again, this is a great practice that meditation and contemplative practices can help develop, is to be aware, what are the stories that I have around this that is actually making me hate or be afraid? And often it's not the task, but maybe I've always told myself I suck at hard efforts. I'm a wimp, or whatever label we use, which there's a whole other rich literature around the problem with labels. I could go on, but I'll stop there and see how that's landing, and if that's answering.
Yeah. I love this notion of clean and dirty effort. I think that's brilliant, because we can, the effort for me, like, if we've always celebrated hard work, then we might work really hard and put every single bit of our energy into it, but it might not be the right thing to do.
Yes.
It might actually not give us the response that we want, or it might not, that measure of success that we were talking about earlier, it might not actually help us to achieve that.
And it's the fear, it's also built in, I write about this, the fear of quitting. There is such a thing as a smart quit or a smart pivot, like the coach who shed that, quit that effort and totally revamp based on the situation in front of them, that sometimes we effort far beyond the utility of something because it's been something we've always done without kind of stopping to go, But for you and me, because I'm a Swedish Puritan who grew up under this idea that you're not the smartest, but you're going to try the hardest.
Yeah.
Then what do you say when you actually quit something? It feels horrible.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to actually kind of unpack that a little bit and recognizing, again, the stories that we might be telling that are limiting us and not allowing us to move in the way we actually have to go.
Yeah. We make it binary, yeah, because we kind of go to win or not, like to win or to fail. And then we don't look at every single thing that exists in between there, which is, no, I chose to take a different path because that's what was actually going to serve myself or my team or my organization better, rather than slogging it out almost mindlessly.
Yeah.
And being, and just running for the sake of running, as opposed to really thinking intentionally about what it is we need to do here. Because that piece around that intentional thinking, we are best served, I think, when we slow down to enable ourselves to do that. Because that intentional thing doesn't really come from that go, either fight, flight, just going. We're really in survival, right? At that point.
If we fight or flight, we are not engaging the prefrontal cortex at all, mind you. And also we can't even eat. When you're that going, you lose your appetite kind of thing. So there's a lot to be said. And people are afraid of slowing down. And I think leaders are kind of, what is this? We got to keep going. We have to learn the smart slowdown to actually take that pause, whether it's the pause between stimulus and response, or it's sort of a more considered place, or if it's just like, we got to exhale here. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack around what's the fear about slowing down, and just being conscious that maybe there is a damn good reason not to slow down, bears chasing us or whatever. But we need to know.
Yeah.
But I guess I would do a more basic point that I do want to make here that is a core to my approach is this idea that we often don't acknowledge our humanity or the humanness of us as, well, humans in this pursuit of something big and wonderful. And I see this in a lot of high performance domains I work in. It could be, I saw it massively in defense, but elite sport, this idea of we have to, I had coaches say to me, hey, KP, I break them, you fix them. And this idea that breaking is okay. And I just wonder if your experience when we drive this way and where, with the rise of long COVID, mental health, we have people who might be more prone to breaking. And we want to examine our practice and as well understand the wonderful capacity we have as humans that differentiate us from every species on the planet. The ability to think about our thinking, to plan, to emote, to have awesome social connection. A lot of species have social connections, so that's not. But also the limitations to how our minds are threat detection machines, and we have to pay attention to that if we're going to take care of ourselves. If the well-meaning leader, the sport coach who uses fear or even worse, shame to motivate athletes is on a path to early breakage. That is so unnecessary. But yet, isn't it ingrained in some of us, this idea of this hard go is also ignoring at times the humanity of the people we're dealing with. And I know that sounds at one level, maybe not hard for a leader to grasp. And it might need a deeper unpacking, but just to keep that front of mind that shame and fear are short-term motivators, if at all. And we want to be really, really careful if we find ourselves defaulting to that. It might be because of our own, often leaders who have a real shameful self-talk in themselves will spill that out unthinkingly. And that's where we want to do our own work.
Yeah. And I mean, but that could take us right back to, early childhood, even adolescence, when maybe they were the messages that we were hearing from parents and other teachers that were, we give them the benefit of the doubt and think that they weren't well-meaning at the time. It's also that philosophy of the school of hard knocks. If I went through it, then you can go through it too. It's not going to hurt you. It'll kind of toughen you up. And that, because we don't celebrate breaking, like we've talked a little bit about winning, failing, but that that path to burnout, which we see a lot of people go through and that are going through right now. Never before in my time in leadership development has it been spoken about and researched and published as much as what it is now. So we acknowledge it's a real thing. We acknowledge that that it impacts businesses, impacts individuals, and people break. And we tend to still put it kind of a little bit under the carpet, not talk about too much. They're having a, they're having a break. They'll come back, when they're ready. We don't really tend to, there's a few that are starting to publish their stories around it, but we still kind of go, well, come back when you're ready, as opposed to simultaneously repair and, be working on whatever it is you need to work on, but also simultaneously be doing what you need to do.
Isn't it so true that I love your hand motions for anybody who can't see what Rita was just doing here? She's, one hand goes up, one hand goes down, the dichotomy thinking. And, it is about sort of rest and digest and perform. We can do them simultaneously. And I think that's the cutting edge of where we're heading in this space, is how to help people understand that we can do both. And it's going to make us so much better and so much more durable.
I think there's more pressure. Well, every generation will say, no, we did it tough. No, we did it tougher. We did it tough. Like every generation has their own story. As a, I'm in, I'll declare it my mid-40s right now. And I'm right in that period of young kids, older parents. My dad passed a couple of years ago. So having to deal now with illnesses and really being sandwiched in the middle, and your own realization of mortality and, friends around us starting to, encounter certain things. And we're running really fast, where, and a lot of leaders I know are in this position. We get to that point in our careers where we've got a little bit more flexibility. The kids are not as dependent on us. So we try and push harder on the career, on that pedal. And it's grit is not always, the only thing and I say that from experience, Kirsten, but obviously you've got, the whole body of knowledge that exists there. So if grit is not enough, like for leaders that are listening to this, and I know I think everyone hates can you give us the top 3 things, but what would be your advice around leaders that are really sandwiched and feeling that pressure from personal circumstances, professional circumstances, this almost societal message that keep going, you can have it all. We've got all these tools and things available to us that we've never had before. But what's your message for people that are where pushing through is not going to do it? And I bet you if you could answer this, you'd be not on my podcast. You'd be doing other things.
Fundamentally, I think we have to challenge the notion, this capitalistic notion of we can have it all.
Yeah.
And I think there's a chasing of something that we don't have, that we want to be able to look at. And I know this is, when is enough? What is enough? And to even be conscious of when we are on that, either the term, the hedonic treadmill, the search for the next hit of something. And it could be the promotion, the this, the that, and the new kitchen in my case, whatever it is. But to that, do we want it all?
Yeah.
And I don't, that's not an easy question to answer, but I think if we get our heads around what is enough, what is it that we really want, and this is more probably from a personal basis. I don't know how you do this from an organizational basis, but so there's that. There is this, and it's out of order, because I think the first order of business is to become a student of our own minds. In a way that 20 years ago, if somebody had told you, hey, somebody had said, I'm going to go for a run, somebody else would have said, who's chasing you? We didn't see the care of the body as a thing. And I think the cutting edge right now, and it's becoming more prevalent and more open to talk about it, is this idea that the mind is the last frontier, and we ignore it or take it for granted at our peril. So if you're asking me for the big piece, it's willingness to, with someone who is, whether it's through meditation or other contemplative practices, there's lots of different ways that go beyond what we're talking about, to start learning about the landscape of how does my mind work? What are my triggers? Because that's the start of everything. Because And if you would know the literature around self-awareness, that they say that 95% of us think we're self-aware and only 15% of us are. Wow, that's a crazy stat. I work into that space hard because if you think you are, why would you need to work on it?
Yeah.
So it's a blind spot. So we have to be able to cultivate that in order to get comfortable and cheerful with things like fear. And that goes back to the humanity. Fear is normal. It's not to be pathologized. Sorry. So two big things.
Yeah.
And I didn't get to three, but I think that's probably
enough to keep us going, that's for sure. And around that self-awareness piece is so important, because it's one thing to be self-aware, but I was working with another group this morning, and then we've got to have the motivation. So once we become aware of something, whatever that thing is, then we've got to have the motivation to do something about it. And
or even to first know what it is in its fullness, like to be able to sit with it, because it might be, I'm afraid, now I have to do, well, wait a minute, where do I feel in the body? What's the story? Because often there's a really well-meaning safety story that our mind is telling us, like, get out of there, don't do that thing. And it's like, wow, okay, so interesting. Thank you for wanting to keep me safe. So you see, there's a couple of steps to be able to sit and not, make friends, because it's only through that radical allowing or accepting that fear can start to be assuaged in the near term. And then we can actually hear the story it's telling and move from there. But if we try to move immediately from fear bites us, and we're then we're reactive. Does that make sense? So that's
gosh. And then we're limiting that thinking, because as fear sets in, then we're going into survival, as I understand it, from a very layperson perspective, but we're not really then able to go into that deeper thinking and that pausing. It's very counterintuitive at that point when you're scared and you feel fearful to move into conceptual strategic thinking and really thinking things through. So it's I've taken so much away, Kirsten. I know we're at time now, but I reckon there's another 3 or 4 topics that we could do. So stay tuned, because we might do that if we've both had fun, of course, doing this, which I have.
Well, you can tell I really had no fun doing this.
No, not at all. Not at all. And if you jump onto YouTube, and you'll see. And my hand gestures, that's the Italian background, Kirsten. I can't help it. Just a completely stereotype. Hey, Kirsten, thank you so much for being on the Deliberate Leader podcast today. You've been able to share so many insights around, I guess, being more comfortable with exploring, fear, but also this notion and challenging this notion of grit and pushing through and what happens when we do. So I'm going to pop a link to your book in the show notes, and also your website. Give us a little quick plug. What is your website, just if people want to jump on and find you?
It's about to launch. So so it's Dr. Kirsten Peterson, and it will be live in a few weeks. So I would give you my old one, but it doesn't represent me anymore. We're all evolving, right? So
we certainly are. Well, I'll pop the new one on, and that way people can jump on and see some of your new stuff. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and I sincerely thank you for coming on today.
It's been a pleasure. Right back at you, Rita, anytime.
See ya. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.